Scandinavia, the land of fire and ice, of fjords and the midnight sun, the home of myths about Odin and Thor, and the home of a people whose history is written deep within their DNA. From the powerful legions of Rome to the founding of modern nations, the Germanic peoples have left an indelible mark on history. But who were they, and where did they come from? For a long time, we relied on sagas, rune stones, and archaeological finds. But today, modern genetic science is opening an entirely new chapter. In this video, we embark on a journey into the distant past, tracing the intricate threads of language, culture, and genetics to uncover the true origin of the Germanic peoples. Up to the north, Scandinavia was trapped under kilometers of thick ice for millennia. Once the ice retreated, the landscape began to turn green and animals appeared, and after them came the humans. Who were these first Scandinavians? Genetics show that they arrived from two main directions. The first wave arrived from the south, from mainland Europe. In the territory of modern-day Denmark and southern Sweden, the first humans appeared nearly 15,000 years ago. After a period of recooling during the so-called Younger Dryas 12,800 years ago, the settlement weakened. The first permanent inhabitants of Scandinavia became the hunters and gatherers of the so-called Arensberg culture more than 12,000 years ago. They were nomads who lived in easily transportable tents, and only after the climate stabilized did they begin to build permanent, semi-subterranean houses. As time progressed, their diet depended more and more on aquatic resources, from which they obtained fish, seals, mollusks, and crabs. However, they also hunted land animals, especially reindeer, and occasionally gathered hazelnuts, wild berries, and roots. They most often laid their dead in communal burial grounds near their settlements and sprinkled their bodies with red ochre. Genetically, they belonged to the so-called Villabruna cluster, and had their roots in the glacial Epigravettian refugium in the territory of present-day Italy and the Balkans. These were people with darker skin, dark hair, and blue eyes. Their dominant male lineages were the Y haplogroups I1 and I2. About 2,000 years after them, a second group appeared. The so-called EHG, East European hunter-gatherers, came along the coast from northwestern Russia and appeared in the north of Scandinavia by 8300 BC at the latest. They had fair skin and mixed hair and eye colors. They brought the Y haplogroups Q1b and R1b1 to Scandinavia. The geographical contrast in hair and eye color corresponds to the current view of the development of body pigmentation in Europeans. The source of genes for blue eyes was primarily the Villabruna cluster, while light skin color and light hair color have their source in Eastern Europe in the EHG cluster. From the mixture of the Villabruna and EHG clusters, the so-called Scandinavian hunter-gatherers emerged, people with fair skin, mixed hair color, and predominantly blue eyes. Although paleoanthropological analyses generally find no significant pathologies on the skeletons of Scandinavian Mesolithic people, and the nature of Northern Europe could theoretically have provided enough quality animal resources, the fact is that these were people of almost dwarf-like stature. The estimated height was only between 161 and 164 centimeters for men, and 151 to 154 centimeters for women. This indicates very poor quality of nutrition in childhood. At the same time, it seems that the genetic prerequisites for physical stature were exceptionally high in the Villabruna cluster, and at least above average in the EHG cluster. Current genetic evidence shows that the male lineages of the Villabruna cluster were dominant. Autosomal data also show that the genetic heritage of the Villabruna cluster was clearly predominant in Danish sites, while the EHG admixture was more pronounced in Norway and Sweden. At first glance, the great diversity of the Villabruna lineages from Y haplogroup I is striking and has parallels elsewhere in Mesolithic Europe. Today, many of these lineages in Europe are extinct or have a geographically restricted distribution. On maps of Y haplogroup distribution, we see that in addition to Scandinavia, The migrations of the Villabruna cluster also reached present-day Ukraine, while the males of the EHG cluster did not reach much further west. Among the maternal, mitochondrial haplogroups, we find four main branches associated with the original European hunter-gatherers. The U5b branch was typical for the Villabruna cluster. The U2e and U4a branches were characteristic of the EHG cluster. The U5a branch probably also had its origin in Eastern Europe, but its distribution at that time reached as far as Western Europe. The chronology of Mesolithic cultures in Scandinavia occupies roughly 6,000 years. During that time, three large Mesolithic complexes, Magalmose, Kongmose, and Erdebale, succeeded each other. However, the peaceful existence of the Scandinavian Mesolithic people did not last forever. Farmers are coming. During the 5th millennium BC, the Mesolithic Erdebale culture was widespread in Scandinavia, characterized by a more sedentary way of life and the production of the first ceramics. Shortly before 4000 BC, however, the first farmers appear in Denmark, the creators of the funnel beaker culture. In terms of livelihood, they combined cereal production with the breeding of domestic animals, cows, pigs, sheep, and goats. But they did not avoid gathering, hunting, and fishing either, which applies mainly to groups living near the coast. They inhabited two-aisled longhouses up to 40 meters long, with a row of central posts supporting the roof. This allowed for the accommodation of the extended family along with the livestock. This culture came to Scandinavia from Western Europe, and although it is only speculation, we can assume that its carriers spoke a language related to today's Basque. In Scandinavia, they introduced burial in megalithic tombs, which were typical for the entire area of Western Europe at the time. These were single-chamber dolmens and later passage graves. They were built of huge stones and intended for repeated burials. Thus, they served as family or community tombs for generations. In the later stages of the culture, cremation graves also appear, where the remains were burned and placed in ceramic vessels. The members of the funnel beaker culture were no longer pure descendants of Anatolian farmers. Genetically, they were characterized by roughly a quarter admixture of hunter-gatherers from the Villabruna cluster. Most remarkable is that the male lines of Villabruna men clearly dominated among them, by almost 100%. This shows that men from Western European hunter-gatherer groups somehow managed to gain control over the agricultural communities. This also means that the arrival of the Funnebeaker culture did not bring any major change in the distribution of Y haplogroups in Scandinavia, although the Ita-1A branch became significantly dominant. However, a dramatic break occurred in the mitochondrial haplogroups. Hunter-gatherer lines receded into the background, and the farmer-maternal haplogroups HV, J, K, and T clearly began to dominate. Another remarkable feature of the funnel beaker culture is light pigmentation. Although the farmers had a slightly lower incidence of blue eyes, they had lighter hair. The frequent occurrence of light hair and eye color is a common feature of the agricultural cultures of the northern half of Central Europe at that time. In addition to the funnel beaker culture, light pigmentation has also been documented in the genetically related globular amphora culture. This is unexpected as these traits cannot have their origin in the Near East, and light hair is also not found in the populations of the Villabruna cluster with which the farmers mixed. So far, it is therefore a question of how to explain this evolution of light pigmentation in farmers. The genetic prerequisites for physical stature were lower in them than in the Mesolithic people, so the estimated height of 165 centimeters for men and 154 centimeters for women may indicate slightly better living conditions. However, it still testifies to the fact that the quality of life was far from ideal, which was, after all, characteristic of all agricultural populations of that time. What happened, however, to the original Mesolithic inhabitants of Scandinavia? The last Mesolithic Mohicans. In the European regions where the wave of Anatolian farmers arrived, the original sparse population of Mesolithic natives was quickly overwhelmed and partly absorbed. In Scandinavia, however, the local hunters and gatherers resisted for a very long time. They became the creators of the so-called Pitted Ware culture, named after the pits pressed into the clay vessels. It was a specialized marine hunting-gathering culture that was spread mainly along the coast in southeastern Sweden. These people consciously rejected farming. Instead, they hunted seals, cod, herring, and pike on a large scale. Supplementarily, they hunted deer, wild boar, and gathered hazelnuts or berries. This was a distinct genetic and cultural return to the indelible way of life. Their homes consisted of light huts with a pole construction and a central hearth. They often buried their dead directly within the settlements or in their close proximity. We know of particularly rich graves from Gotland. In terms of stature, they were again very small people, with a height of 163 to 165 centimeters for men, and 156 to 158 centimeters for women. The people of the Pitted Ware culture lived alongside the funnel beaker people for many centuries. This was also reflected in their genetic profile from the beginning of the third millennium, which carries visible traces of farmer admixture. This coexistence, however, ended soon after. We know from paleogenetic research that, like other agricultural populations in Europe at that time, the funnel beaker people were periodically decimated by an epidemic of the bubonic plague, Yersinia pestis. As a result, the population density fluctuated, and the accompanying phenomenon of these population catastrophes was apparently radical changes in vegetation. This created the conditions for the expansion of steppe pastoralists from the area of present-day Ukraine, which radically changed the genetic profile not only in Scandinavia, but in all of Europe. Thanks for watching, and if you want to delve deeper into the fascinating world of European history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. See you next time.